Hi, my name is Mike Griffin with Life in the Slow Lane. You know it's Christmas, and that means it's about time to start planning your trips for next year. When I plan trips, I like to use the best apps I can find. There are a lot of apps out there, but my favorite is RV Trip Wizard. Now, RV Trip Wizard isn't a mobile app. It doesn't just install on your phone. It's a web application, so you have to use a web browser. That means you kind of have to use your PC to get the best out of RV Trip Wizard. Let me show you some of the features and the benefits of using RV Trip Wizard. To start RV Trip Wizard, just go to rvtripwizard.com. When you get there, you'll see this page, and you can scroll down and view all of the features of the software. Now, RV Trip Wizard is actually maintained on their servers, so nothing is ever saved to your PC because it's all web-based. Once you have your login, you'll just select Member Login, and it'll take you to the login screen. Now, the first time you put your email address and password in, you can just select the Remember Me block, and from that point on, whenever you come back to this page, both of those will be filled in, and you'll be able to log in very quickly. When you log into RV Trip Wizard, it will bring up your last trip if you have an option selected to do that. Now, we'll go over that later, but for right now, it brought up the last trip I had in here, which was a trip I took last year from Albuquerque to Pasadena, California. Now, this is good because you can see the map and the way it draws the route over on the right, and we're going to look at that closer. And over on the left, you see the itinerary. What it does is for each stop along the way, it shows you those stops on the left side as part of your itinerary, and it gives you a lot of information about those stops. Now, what we're going to do is take a look at how to set all of this up before we go in and make our own trip. So to get started, let's go to the top right corner where it says Account Settings, and we're going to go to Trip Preferences. Now, in Trip Preferences, there are several tabs across the top, and the first tab is RV Info. This is important because you're going to put in information about your RV here. This is to help several things. One is it shows you your route based on your RV height. It won't route you where there's bridges too low, for example. And it also helps compute how far you're going to travel in a given trip leg based on how much you want to travel per day and how many miles per gallon of fuel you have. It'll give you warnings about when you need fuel stops. And it also will compute default values for how much fuel you're going to need along the trip and how much that's going to cost. So you'll fill all of this in here and make it as accurate as you can and understand that these are defaults. On personal expenses per day, these are also defaults, and you need to understand that you can go in later for each campground and override these. Now, I don't usually figure in meals and miscellaneous expenses, so I leave those at zero, defaulted at zero. But as an average campground fee, I put around $45 for the type of trips that I take. Under the Routing tab, there are 3 questions. Avoid major highways, toll roads, and ferries. I say no to all of these. Driving. This is an important screen because it allows you to set up how fast you think you're going to go and how many hours a day you want to drive, or how many miles per day you want to drive. Now, if you look over on the right behind this dialog box, you can see a circle over here around Albuquerque. What it will do is it will draw your route, but there can be a circle around a target place, let's say in this case Albuquerque, and that circle can be so many miles away from Albuquerque or so many hours away from Albuquerque. So if I drive and I say that my average given fuel stops is around 50 miles per hour, and I want to drive around 4 hours per day, what it's going to do is 4 hours times 50 miles per hour. It's going to say that in 4 hours I can probably drive around 200 miles, and so that circle is going to be about 200 miles away from Albuquerque. We'll see this in a little bit because wherever that circle crosses my route is where I might want to stay on my way to my next destination. Now you can also specify miles per day here. If you specify miles per day, the first value will be where you have that circle, but you can also specify other values for other circles that you can put along the way. So you can experiment with this when you try it for the first time. Under General Settings, this is where you auto-load the last open trip. This is what I told you in the beginning. I have it checked so that every time I come into RV Trip Wizard, it will always bring up the last trip that I had open. Memberships and favorites. Along the left side, you see a list of all types of parks. And on the right, you see what your favorites are. Now this is important because when you later look at the map, it's going to overlay these icons that are your favorites on the map, so you'll see places that you like to stop. Now in my case, my favorites are things like Passport America, Escapees, FMCA, Good Sam. You can see the list. So these things are going to appear on the map when I open the map and I choose to see all of the parks. So you select Save Settings and your settings are saved. Now let's take a look at the map. For the map, you can see that on the right side of the map is Albuquerque, and you can see the route along the way. Now you can see those icons that were on my favorites along the way. For example, you see an icon around Albuquerque, you see a KOA right around where the circle crosses, and then you see an F. That means that it's a campground that's not one of the ones on my favorites. And then you see a Good Sam campground, and it just goes around the circle. So this will show me an overall view of where my entire route is, and I can know what I'm going to be doing by just looking at this map. Now the neat thing about this is that for every point on the map on the right, there is an itinerary point on the left. And so that itinerary is going to show us where we want to go, where we're going to go, and how long it's going to take to get there. So let's take a close look at the itinerary. The itinerary is important because you can use it you can print it, you can share it with other people, and it really gives you a lot of information about your trip that you won't see on the map. For example, over here now, if we've got Albuquerque highlighted, you can see Albuquerque kind of bouncing over there on the map to the right. And as we go down and look at the other places like the KOA in Holbrook, Arizona, you can see that it's bouncing on the map. When you scroll down all the way to the bottom, you can see that the last place we're going to stay, which is Valencia Travel Village, is bouncing now, and you can see the little map over there that it's a Passport America campground. Now, along the way, you'll see at the top the miles and hours. So when I leave Albuquerque and I arrive at the KOA in Holbrook, it's going to be about 239 miles, and it's going to be an estimated 4 hours and 47 minutes of driving at 50 miles per hour average. Going from KOA Holbrook to Black Bart's RV Park in Flagstaff is going to be about 90 miles, and it's going to take me about 1 hour and 48 minutes. Now, if I say when I create the trip that I'm going to start on Sunday, the 15th of October, then when I add KOA Holbrook and say that I'm going to stay there 2 nights, it knows I'm arriving on the 15th, and it will keep me there 2 nights so that when I leave here, I'll arrive at Black Bart's on the 17th. So it will automatically bump your dates as you add items to the itinerary. Over in the nights column, you can see that it says how many nights you're going to be staying. Another little icon in here, which is a little calendar with a check mark, appears if you put reservation info in for this particular campground. And we're going to show you how to do that when we make our own trip very shortly. So the itinerary is pretty important because so far it's given us how many miles we're going to travel between stops, how many hours between stops, how many nights we're going to stay. But it also takes those estimated costs that we put in for fuel and for campgrounds, and it kind of sums them up for the number based on the number of nights and how far we've traveled, and it tells me that this leg of the trip is going to run around $266. If you look at the bottom, it sums all of this up. It'll say that for the whole trip, we're going to travel about 1,109 miles, and we're going to stay 72 nights at a cost of about $6,407. Another feature we have in this itinerary over here is that we can take the itinerary and do a lot of cool things with it. So if you choose the little wrench up here at the top, Trip Tools, you can see all these options you have. Now these options are pretty neat because you can send this itinerary to Facebook or the map. And one of my favorites, send to a friend. If you select send to a friend, this box comes up and you can put the email address of a friend of yours who also has RV Trip Wizard. If you do that, it will send them your itinerary. Now, this is really neat because it won't just send them an email. What it will do is it will, if they're registered with RV Trip Wizard under that email address, is it will actually send them the itinerary and it will appear in their own list of trips. So when they go to their open trips box and open up all their open trips, they'll see the trip you sent them. This has been really handy when we're traveling with other people and we're planning a trip with a lot of stops, and we can share this trip with everybody that we're going with. It's been very handy. Back to the tool, we can email the itinerary. We can export it to your Google Calendar. You can also export the itinerary portion to Excel. And I'm going to come back to print in a minute. You can delete stops, show the turn-by-turn route that you might see like on a GPS. And you can, of course, rename this trip. This one, as you see in the red bar at the top, is called Albuquerque to Pasadena. You can rename that. You can copy the trip so that if you want to make changes to it without altering the original trip, you can do that. And, of course, you can delete the trip. Now, one of my favorite things to do is to print it, because a lot of times you just want to have a copy of it, or you just want to email somebody you're traveling with who may not have RV Trip Wizard what your final itinerary is. If you select print, you'll get this screen that shows you the map of the overall trip on the first page. And then as you scroll down, it gives you in chart form the itinerary with all of the details. Now this will include any comments you make about a particular campground, which will appear below the campground name in italics, I believe, and it will show you everything, including all of your totals. I usually print this as a PDF, and when you do it, it's really handy to have if you want to carry it in the front of your coach while you're traveling, or if you just want to share it with someone else. So the itineraries, very handy information to have. We're going to look at some other things you can do with it with individual campgrounds when we make our own trip. So let's go over and look at the map for a couple of minutes, and we'll see some of the things that we can do with the map. The map is good because you can see a lot of detail with it. Now, right now, we have this thing selected at the top that shows Hide Parks or Show Parks. If you select Show Parks, it'll show all of the campgrounds in a particular area. Now let's zoom in to Albuquerque to take a look at this and see what it'll look like if we can look at the campgrounds in the Albuquerque area. I'm going to bring it over to mid-screen, and we're going to zoom in. Now the first thing you'll notice about the Albuquerque area right now is that it is showing our bridge heights. Based on what we said, we know that we have low clearance bridges, and it will show those. It's also going to route us to our next destination on a route that should be safe for the RV. But you might notice there are no campgrounds here, and that's because we have Hide Parks turned. We have it turned off. So we're going to set Show Parks. And you can see all of the campgrounds that appear on the map. Now, this is a lot of campgrounds, and there's a lot more than you might think. You'll see the typical icons that we had on our favorites, and you can see what's along your route and what's way off your route. But the nice thing about this is that you can hover over any one of these icons, and it will give you a little box that shows you the address, the name of the campground, and the address of the campground. And if you scoot down to more park details, it brings up this screen that shows you the name of the campground and information about it that they can give you. Now this particular campground must be a pretty small one because it's not giving me a lot of information. So let's go look at one that does. Let's hover over this one. Here's a KOA, more park details, and you can see what it fills in for. This is what it has for most campgrounds. It'll have the phone number where you can go ahead and call it. It has a link to their website, a link to the satellite view, It has where you can go look at the reviews on RV Park Reviews. You can send an email, and it gives you information about how often it's open, and it gives you information about approximate price. Now in the center of the screen is general information about the KOA itself. How many total sites, how many pull-throughs, just some general information. We're going to take another look at this when we go make our own very short trip in a little bit. Now, besides looking at all the campgrounds, we can also take another look at some other great information that you can get by looking at parks. Now, you see the parks in the back, and those are the ones that were our favorites, but we can filter those. We can say, hey, only show me ones that have big rigs, or only that accommodate big rigs, or the ones that have Wi-Fi, or you can check several boxes, big rigs and Wi-Fi. And you can also specify a filtering based on the number of stars they get on their reviews. You can also filter out any that are just in a particular state. You can filter them in, if you will, and you'll be able to see the ones in a particular state. I don't typically use this much, but it's there if you need it. Another favorite feature of mine are these POIs. Now, this is really great because if we zoom in a little bit more, let's zoom in a little bit more to Albuquerque. Okay, we'll keep it right there. I'm going to bring up POI, and you'll see this screen that shows common points of interest on the right side. Now, these are fuel stations on the left mostly, and then you have other places that you might stop if you want to put your RV there for the night or to visit or whatnot. And they're grouped over here on the left. For example, that's what this link button's for. If you select fuel, you'll see that the fuel points all show up with like a green highlight. And if we go over here and click Save and Close, then what happens is those places are now added to the map. So notice here's the fuel stop there. Here is a Flying J. There's a Petro. And they've been added to the map. There's a TA over there. So this is really great because not only do you see campgrounds, but you can overlay things like fuel stops and Walmarts. I think that's really handy, and it's one of the most useful things that I can do with it. Finally, on the map, there is something they have in beta right now. It's called elevation. So our trip from Albuquerque to Pasadena goes quite a ways, and if you select the elevation beta at the bottom down here, they can show you the total miles on your trip. Now remember, our total miles are 1,109, but you'll see over on the right it goes to 1,100, and you can see the elevation all along the route. Right on the top here are the numbers that match the itinerary numbers over on the left. So for example, you can see that number 5 here is over here. It's the Grand Canyon Railway RV Park. So at number 5, my elevation is going to be about 6,728 feet. This might help you to do some of your planning if you're concerned about elevations. Let's get rid of that. So what we want to do now is go make our own trip. Let's get started on that. Now I've zoomed back out to show the full view of the Albuquerque trip. But from here, we're going to start our own trip. And to do that, we go to New Trip, and we put in the name of our trip. Now I'm going to call this trip Branson. And we're going to start on the 2nd of February, 2018. And we're going to say Create. Now when you do this, it wants to know where you're going to start your trip. You can use the location you're in, or we can search for a place to start. Now let's just generically start at Nashville, Tennessee. And when you type Nashville, you can see that it gives you suggestions, and we're just going to generically put Nashville, Tennessee, United States, and we're going to start here. When you do this, the map cleans up. Of course, it's a new trip, and since we left all of those points of interest on and the campgrounds on, look, you're going to see all of that across the Nashville area. That's a lot of fuel stops and a lot of places to stay. A lot more than you thought probably when you look at maps like this. So let's go clean this up a little bit. First of all, let's turn off all the fuel stops, and then let's hide all the parks. So we've got a cleaner picture of Nashville, and since we've added it, it starts over here on Friday, the 2nd of February. On the 2nd of February. It's Friday, 2nd of February of 18, Nashville, Tennessee. Now, where do we go next? Well, we want to go to Branson. So we just go up here and say Branson. I'm just going to put Branson MO, and you can see that it has a place. Now, we're not choosing any campgrounds yet. You could choose a campground right away here, but my technique usually is to just go from major point to major point and then go back and fill in the campgrounds. So we're going to select Branson. Now, as soon as we do that, it's going to come up and it's going to show me just a generic icon around Branson. If you go up like you do a campground and hover over that and you choose more details, there's your generic stop Branson. Let's say we're going to stay 4 nights in Branson, and we're going to add it after the last stop, which is Nashville in this case. So we're going to add it to the trip. Now what it's done is it's gone over and drawn our route, and you can see in the itinerary that it's going to be 456 miles and about a 9-hour trip to get from Nashville, Tennessee to Branson at my speed of about 50 miles an hour. We're going to stay 4 nights, and my estimated fuel cost and camping fees are about $388. Now we can see the overall trip by saying show entire trip, and it'll show you the basic path. But if we go back to Nashville and we hover there, you can do this over here too. But if we hover over Nashville and then we go over to the right and select the little circle, it will take that circle you see now around Branson and put it around Nashville. Now remember when I said that I like to drive about 4 hours per day, and I drive about 50 miles an hour. Well, it's drawn the route, and even though this is as the crow flies, this is roughly 4 hours away from Nashville. So if I want to find a place to stay on the way, and you can see that it looks like it's about halfway, so it might be a good place to stop somewhere in here. All we have to do is zoom in here to this, and we want to get really close in here and look at this. Let me get just a little closer. And then we have to look for a place to stay. So I'm going to go turn on the campgrounds again. And we can see all of the campgrounds in the area where I might want to pull off for the night. Now, I probably don't want to pull off too far away from where I'm traveling. But this place here looks like it's right on the route. It's right on my route. It's called Camelot. So hover over that icon, choose more park details, and I can see all the information about the park. If I wanted to now, I could go look at the website and do all these other things. I see there's an escapees discount, and I would call them and check on things. And if I decided I wanted to stay here, I would just say I want to stay 1 night, and I'm going to make it right after Nashville, and we'll add it to the trip. So what it's done now is it's added that stop in here. Now, because of all the campgrounds on the map, it's a little difficult to see. So we could just go hide the parks. And now you can see our 3 stops here, and you can see them over on the itinerary on the left. By doing this, you can see that we're going to go from Nashville to Camelot. It's going to be about 246 miles and about a 5-hour drive. It's a little further than I'd like to drive, but that place is on the interstate, and I'm willing to drive a little extra that day. So we'll go about 5 hours, and we'll stay 1 night. My estimated cost for that leg of the trip is $150. The next stop's going to be somewhere in Branson. We don't know where yet. We're about to go choose that, but Branson's about 210 miles away and another 4 hours. So let's bring it over. And I know this is going to be within my 4-hour drive limit, so I'm good there. And we're going to zoom in to Branson. And once we bring it down here, we're going to just say, show all the parks in the area. Well, there's a lot of places to stay in the Branson area, too. And I'm kind of I can get good SAMs, so I'm going to hover over this one, and I see it's America's Best Campground. It looks like it's real close. We could zoom in tighter if we wanted, but I'm just going to pick one here, and we'll say more park details on that. Let me see. Sometimes you want to get in a little closer, so you don't get that artifacts. There we go. America's Best Campground. More park details. We're going to stay in Branson. We said 4 nights. There's all the information. And we're going to make it after that Camelot RV campground stop, and we're going to add it to the trip. Now, since we did that, I no longer need to keep Branson as a generic placeholder. So I'll just hover over Branson, and go over here and delete it from the itinerary. Then to see our trip, we'll hide all of the parks. And this is our trip map now. We start somewhere in Nashville, and we drive 246 miles, about 5 hours to get to Camelot. Then we get up the next day on the 3rd of February, and we drive 211 miles, about 4 hours and 13 minutes, at an expense of about $270 to stay there at the campground, including fuel to get there from Camelot to America's Best Campground. So this is pretty good, and I can take this trip, as you saw earlier, and print it and use it any way I want to use it. Now, the map on the right is based on Google Maps as well. You can also go down to the right down here and do some Google Map things if you zoom in close enough, like look at the satellite view, terrain, and etc. But I usually just use this map here and try to use it the way it is. You can also drag your route. If you zoom in really close here and you see a route you don't like, you can pick the route up and drag it over and play with routes, and it will try to put you on those safe routes again for your RV. So it's a good tool. I don't always rely on any one source for my travel directions. This is very good, and I found that when we use RV Trip Wizard, generally speaking, we'll be driving on those roads. But I always double check everything with GPS and further with whatever specific directions the campground provides on their website. That's pretty much an overview of RV Trip Wizard. You can see it's a very powerful tool. It lets you do mapping. It lets you have a great itinerary that you can print, and it just gives you all kinds of information to plan your trips and to share your trips, which I think is very important. This is Mike Griffin with Life in the Slow Lane. See you next time.